Incidents like the one I've just described eventually convinced me that I needed to find a place of my own where I was beholden to no authority other than the principles of Dhamma and Vinaya. Motivated by that resolve, I returned to Asokarama Monastery during my 3rd year of service to request that I be relieved of my duties as abbot and supervisor of Nibbāna Sangwara Monastery. After detailed discussions with the relevant Sangha authorities, they agreed to find another experienced monk willing to replace me and carry on with the development of what was becoming a royally sponsored monastic center with grand expectations, a project in which I wanted no part. Instinctively, I had always been drawn to wilderness locations that provided seclusion and refuge from the world's messy compromises. So, after a short stay helping with teaching duties at Asokarama Monastery, I started to travel again. Due to my age, I was 62 years old by that time, and chronic physical conditions that limited my mobility, I was willing to accept rides on my travels around the country. Trekking along forest trails was reserved for wilderness areas where motorized traffic was impractical or impossible. Out of undying respect for Ajaan Lee Damodaro, whose memory I always kept close to my heart, I headed for Chinlan Mountain in Lopburi Province just northeast of Bangkok, a locale where Ajaan Lee had wandered Dutanga and established a monastery almost 25 years earlier. I intended to retrace his steps through the mountains and visit that monastery to honor the senior monk who had urged and emboldened me as a young monk to seek out Ajaan Mun in the wilds of Chiang Mai. I've never forgotten the kindness and encouragement he showed to a raw recruit in the forest tradition. In many ways, Ajaan Lee was everything that I was not. As a teacher, he was always conscious of his audience and ready, on the spur of the moment, to adapt his language to the level of the people to whom he was speaking. With farmers and traders, he bantered fluently in the Laotian dialects of his northeastern homeland. With shopkeepers and government officials, on the other hand, he conversed in Thai, the national language, like a native speaker. When addressing members of the Bangkok elite, he knew all the refined and polished idioms and always spoke appropriately for the occasion. He had encouraged me to follow his example, but soon realized I was a hopeless case. The communication skills that he'd mastered just didn't come naturally to me. Comparing my own rustic style to Ajaan Lee's elegance and erudition was like comparing a smelly pile of shit with a well-manicured flower garden. In everyday conversation, I tended to address people with blunt and folksy language. When principles of Dhamma came up, however, my discourse became more deliberate and restrained, and my manner more circumspect due to a profound respect for the value of the Buddha's teachings. At the same time, my tone was usually serious and direct. I didn't like to sugarcoat my message. Experience taught me that the best way to get the listener's attention was to punch them where it hurt most. Then they would wake up and start to really focus on what I was saying. On the other hand, if I was in the audience when another teacher spoke on Dhamma themes, I listened quietly and didn't interrupt. I still felt like a student of practice and wanted to learn more whenever I had the chance. From Chinlan Mountain, I journeyed further northwest to Tak Province, a mountainous wilderness district on the Burmese border. Several of the monks who had trained under my guidance when I was the abbot of Crystal Mountain Monastery in Chantaburi had already put down roots in the area's vast jungle. I struggled to walk through the boulder-strewn terrain to reach the sites where they had built monasteries and forest hermitages. The dense, almost impenetrable forest reminded me of my years practicing with Ajaan Mun in the uninhabited, inhospitable wilderness areas of the north. The austere environment in Tak Province recalled years of internal struggle when only enormous effort, strict discipline, and unwavering determination allowed me to survive the ordeals and become a standard-bearer for wilderness monks everywhere. It pleased me immensely to see disciples I'd trained from an early age become rightful heirs to the legacies of monks like Ajaan Mun, Ajaan Kao, and Ajaan Lee. These disciples had taken the untamed wilderness as their home and refuge, while training a new generation of practicing monks in the tried-and-true meditative lifestyle pioneered by Ajaan Sao and Ajaan Mun, the grandfathers of the Thai forest movement. Even in the modern world, which had increasingly lost its reverence for nature's sanctuaries, resilient pockets of dedicated forest monks continued to buck contemporary trends while living and practicing quietly on the borderland of modern society. I envied their independence. My body could no longer endure the physical punishment that this mode of living entailed. My days of indefatigable vitality were slowly coming to an end. Aware of my penchant for living in caves, my disciples arranged a trip north up the Ping River, which flowed down from northern Chiang Mai through mountainous regions where age-old cave sites abounded. The steep cliffs that jutted out over the river basin, and the mountains and valleys stretching back beyond them, acted as a natural barrier separating the primordial landscape from modern-day development. Along the length of the mighty Ping, hundreds of ancient monasteries and stupas had fallen into ruin, their material remains scattered throughout the river valley. Human settlements were sparse in this interior jungle. We relied for our alms food on the families of fishermen that eked out their subsistence, while living on raft houses moored in small, sheltered inlets recessed into the riverbank. Trudging slowly along the bank of the wide river, we heard the trumpeting sounds of wild elephants that had come down to drink and bathe at the river's edge. Schools of colorful fish were visible swimming just beneath the surface of the glass-clear water. The forest came alive each morning with the hooting and screeching cries of monkeys and gibbons that reverberated through the canyons in the early daylight hours. The midday air pulsated with the buzzing, shrieking, and hissing noises of countless varieties of insects. The menacing growls of clouded leopards heralding the onset of darkness alternated with the loud, abrupt noises of their prey, the barking deer. From one sunrise to the next, the forest resounded with activity. When we reached the Lee district of Longtime province, our party of Dhutanga monks turned away from the river trail and hiked over the steep hills to the east and down into an adjacent valley. We were searching for the entrance to Chang Rong Cave, once the spiritual center of a long-forgotten Buddhist civilization that flourished at the peak of human activity in the Ping River Valley. On the floor of the large cavern inside that cave, an ancient ruler had built a small pavilion supported by huge golden teakwood timbers. The pavilion's floor was made of golden teakwood planks, polished smooth by centuries of bowing to the cave's many Buddha statues situated in niches along the walls. Its roof, covered with teakwood shingles, fit snugly under the cave's arched ceiling. Sturdy wooden dowels pounded into the timber joints held the structure together. On the ground beside the pavilion lay an ornate wooden palanquin used in olden times to transport distinguished patrons. Every nook and cranny in the cave's walls housed a Buddha statue, some large, some small. Many statues had cracked or broken over the centuries, and their missing limbs and heads lay scattered on the ground below. The overall effect of this scene had inspired awe and wonder in generations of intrepid pilgrims who had trekked through the wilderness to pay reverence. The evidence of human intrusion in the area was minimal. Chang Rong Cave's seclusion was almost complete. Since no roads in or out existed at the time, the only way for ordinary people to reach the cave was by riverboat. Even then, they were forced to hike in through the jungle and contend with the perils of wild animals and biting insects. Powerful forces of the natural world, both earthly and celestial, guarded the cave's privacy. Sanctuaries of Buddhist heritage like this ancient monument, lost in the overgrown jungle, still unspoiled and unaltered, have unfortunately become a rare sight even in a country like ours, which boasts such a time-honored Buddhist culture. Living in the depths of the jungle at Chang Rong Cave coaxed my mind to reflect on the rapid changes that had taken place in the world since Ajaan Mun passed away. Large swaths of wilderness habitat had succumbed to the restless hunger of people of all classes seeking to take advantage of the country's natural resources for their own financial gain. From small farmers expanding their fields to greedy businessmen seeking profit from the logging of timber, everyone encroached on the wilderness without feeling shame or hesitation about the propriety of their actions. The nation's wilderness areas were disappearing at a rate matched only by the proliferation of greed, aversion, and delusion in the confused jungles of its citizens' hearts. The wholesale destruction of our forests coincided with an uncontrolled expansion of the tangled undergrowth of mental defilements. All too often, people believe the conditions of the earth can be changed to ensure human happiness, to provide jobs, and to create material wealth and a comfortable life. Everyone is trying to accumulate as much wealth as possible, but the search for material wealth and the quest for spiritual wealth are in many ways incompatible. Material wealth views the earth and its resources as commodities for human consumption, and the harvesting of those resources as a human right. Spiritual wealth views the same abundant resources as a treasure to be safeguarded and a natural setting for profound spiritual experiences. Because monks initially come from the lay society, this materialist worldview has infiltrated monastic communities. The ensuing change in attitudes has been dramatic. My earliest disciples, who came to the monkhood from rural farming families, had only elementary or middle school educations, but they were accustomed to working long, hard hours in the rice fields during the planting and harvesting seasons. Never ones to shy away from the demands of physical labor, those boys gave tireless effort to their tasks. Their thoughts were unruly, but their hearts had the strength to buckle down and rein in the restlessness in their minds. Though not highly educated, they were smart in practical, common-sense ways. Quick to learn, they exhibited a natural cleverness in devising and applying new ideas. Being serious and well-intentioned, that first group of disciples was easy to teach using strict training methods that pushed them to the limits of their abilities. They were realistic and tough-minded. They didn't argue or talk back. Later, steel oxen replaced those of flesh and bone in plowing the fields and preparing the soil for sowing. Consequently, the sons of today's farmers engage in less physical labor and have more idle time to entertain social distractions. They study longer in school but engage less in religious activities. Their minds become so crammed with stressful thoughts on how to secure a wife and where to make a living that hardly a crack is left open to allow access for Dhamma themes to enter their consciousness. Even fundamental precepts of decent behavior are discarded by the wayside on the anticipated road to prosperity. If these young village men become monks at all, it's merely for a short-term stay to please their parents and fulfill some social expectation. With the advancement of higher education in subsequent generations, a new breed of young men shows up to apply for monastic training. These recruits represent a more educated and skeptical generation of young people who have been raised mostly in an atmosphere of indifference to the supreme virtues that previous generations had taken for granted. The comfortable, sheltered lifestyle youngsters enjoy nowadays makes them less fit and less inclined to tackle the primitive conditions of Dhutanga life. Hiking on narrow, uneven forest trails, sleeping in mosquito-infested jungles, and subsisting on rough village fare. Reflecting on the future, I realized that the remainder of my life would be dedicated to introducing Thai forest practices to monks whose minds were trained in intellectual skills, but who were sorely lacking in basic survival skills. A forest monk must have the wiliness of a fox, the strength of an elephant, and the heart of a tiger to follow the Buddha's path to the end. Today's educational system doesn't teach those virtues. University graduates are often too smart for their own good. Their first challenge? They need to realize how stupid they truly are before they can bow down in earnest and accept their teacher's training.